all performance philosophy, I think, needs to be judged in two dimensions. It's got to work as drama, and it's also got to work as philosophy. It would be pointless if it didn't work as philosophy. So the challenge is actually, how do you actually make performance philosophical? Philosophy, and the way I answer that, to start off with, is that what I think I'm performing is that strange commitment that philosophy takes. I mean, once you step beyond just career development, I've got to produce this number of papers, this number of books, and I left that world a long time ago, okay? A lot of philosophy is kind of, you're stuck on an idea, you can't give it up. You've got to keep on working at it. And actually, that's terribly dramatic. And if you think about the lives of eminent philosophers, Kant, age 45, reads a book on Hume, goes practically mad, doesn't write for 10 years, and then comes back with pretty pure reason. But the argument he reads, by the way, is on causality. And famously, it broke like the Wolffian Leibnizian synthesis on which he based his life. That's terrifically dramatic. Or, I'll give you another one. There's a lovely, famous thing of Kierkegaard in Denmark. Kierkegaard had famously no sense of humour. He was a conqueror man. And there was this satirical magazine, which was kind of the private eye of the day, and he challenged them to send him up. And for 3 years they sent him up, and there was this whole sequence of exchanges between Scimitar laughing at Kierkegaard and Kierkegaard's response to it. It's a terribly dramatic conflict. And for me, that's the place I would probably start to perform from. Okay? But there's another reason why I think philosophy works as performance. At its heart, it has something about truth and error. It has something about a very basic battle between truth and error. However, they're both defined, and different philosophies will define different ones of truth, different ones of error, and they will shift and move the contours. This conflict is then nothing but dramatic. For what else is drama but an evolving narrative in which illusion, delusion, and actuality emerge and shift their perspective? The game then is to make that drama palpable. Here, I have to confess something. You might have all realised I come from the postmodern school of philosophy. It's probably very obvious. It's a school that loves its drama, and it's loved, and it always has pretensions to literature. But I think it would stand for analytical philosophy as well. The one that always comes to my mind is A.J. Ayer writes in the prefix to a late edition of Language, Truth and Logic, which is a bit of a dry old book. He writes, "This was written with all the passion of a young man." And you read that and you think, wow, this is a passionate book. And then, of course, you try to spot the passion in it. And actually, that's quite fun. And you can perform the passion in language. I tried. You can just about do it. It wasn't a wonderful success. But the point is, trying to find out what he thinks is passionate, performing the passion as he looks back on it and how we may understand it. There's lots of themes to play with, lots of ways you might actually reach an audience. And what is more, philosophical ideas show another aspect of drama for me. They are by their definition. They must have both a public exposition, but they also got to work on an individual level. For the point about a good idea is that it hooks you into it. You feel parts of it. Even you might feel you've already known it or could have known it. And I might actually argue that the harder the idea was to grasp, if it's a good idea, the deeper it goes, the more it opens you out, the more it allows you to think about who you are and what you're doing. And for me, that's what thinking is all about. It's kind of articulating bits in your mind that you wouldn't necessarily tell apart, but it allows you to tell apart that which appears frozen. And you can really do that with drama, and you can do it with philosophy. And here you're playing with the old tension in philosophy between feeling and ideas. But this tension isn't complex. I certainly wouldn't take any kind of neat little platonic feeling kind of dodgy ideas good. Because the point about drama is that the power of drama and also art, I think, lies in its ability to create complex feelings which catch up audiences, but also individuals, such that this genesis of this complex feeling that's been created in you and in an audience has a corollary. You can't just kind of let it still in your mind. The point about a drama is you go out and say, what happened there? And then you discuss it with other people, and it's that discussion that kind of creates the second aspect of feeling. And it allows you to clarify what's happening in Hamlet, and it allows you to think about what it's all about, or what's happening in Oedipus Rex. And so drama automatically leads into philosophy, because what else is that but philosophy? And with stand-up philosophy, all I do is I play with that. I start off with ideas, I go to feelings, I create little loops between them, so that you can kind of have an idea that will communicate a feeling that will then affect you with another idea. So, So it's not about, I'm reversing then the direction of travel. Philosophy does tend to see it as the great clarifier of feeling, but stand-up has to use it to catch feelings and feed them back to ideas and create little dramas. but small, powerful, marching ideas. This raises, of course, questions. Firstly, do I really think such drama is possible? What does stand-up thinking involve? But secondly, does it work? In the rest of the paper, I'm going to have a look at these. First of all, I'm being a little disingenuous. I don't have one way to perform stand-up. I have at least two. The first is I do a show called Standing Up for Freedom, because freedom's worth standing up for, which is a backwards read for the history of freedom from Deleuze to Socrates. And in the second one, I have a much more conventional show, which I call the Idea Breaker's Yard, which is where ideas come when they've passed the sell-by date, and I break out the bits that are good at them and I send them spinning on their way. But what unites both of those, and what makes all of this possible, and actually makes presenting a paper, you might notice I'm only half reading it, difficult actually, is that I actually work orally. So I don't, most of the work I've done, and what I mean by that, I started off as a storyteller. And I'm also very badly dyspraxic, dyslexic, whatever they call people who have problems reading. I didn't learn to read till I was 10. But that gives me a very phenomenal memory, and I'm good at it. It's not very accurate, but it's very good. Okay? And that's the point. All the fun of it is that it's not very accurate, but it is very good. And so the way I will work is I'll go back to a text, I will read it. And as I'm kind of reading it, I'm also thinking, how am I going to perform it? What I don't do is write down a neat précis of a text. Don't do that. I don't kind of ever write down my performance pieces. They never get written. They get generated in my mind, and it's what I remember. It's what I remember. And it has its advantages, because you never have that problem of how, when people ask you, how do you remember that much? And I think, I don't really. Because memory, if you think, how do you remember such a thing? That's because there's a real version of it that you're having to remember. They're lines. In our storytelling, our entire storytelling style is based on the fact that I can't remember lines accurately. I just can't. My memory doesn't work like that. It doesn't work accurately. But therefore, you can kind of build that into the stand-up, because it makes it more like a discussion. You can change it by the audience. You can ignore your paper and just carry on talking. It's good. Okay? And it forces you to do that. But then it creates a danger, of course. And it does create a danger that what you're actually creating are just monsters. They're just kind of philosophical potpourris, a little bit of this idea, a little bit of that idea, and I freely confess my memory is inaccurate. And I think I'd answer that rather complexly. First of all, I would say, provocatively perhaps, that whoever really remembers a philosopher, really remembers all the philosopher, but then whoever forgets all philosophy. Actually, what most people have in their heads, particularly people who are politicians, people who've done political science, they've gone to one or two philosophy papers, haven't they? They've done the history of political thought once and they've forgotten it, or they've partially remembered it. And so what you're doing is you're performing their memory back at them, and you're making it matter to them again. You're spinning it off in a different direction. And you can have an awful lot of effect by coming from that position, that not quite purist philosophy position. That's kind of one defence I put on it. But also the purist philosopher, and I certainly started off as a very purist philosopher, would also say something else. Something else you learn if you're my combination of dyspraxic, whatever, is that actually philosophy spent most of its life warring. If you think about it, it's invented 2,500 years ago. We go back to Heracles, it's more than that. Yes, there are some texts. What are the texts writing down? They're writing down accounts of conversations. Plato famously boasts in a letter, I never write down my ideas, I write down Socrates' ideas. Of course he's lying. But it's a very complicated lie, because he genuinely claims never to write down his own ideas because he wanted his ideas to be oral. Or you think about where survives Aristotle. Most of Aristotle's books don't survive, it's his lecture notes. And throughout the Middle Ages, ideas were actually oral things. They were the things that survived, the people memories that moved from university to university. They were like stories. And a lot of the kind of the stuff I love, my research topic years ago, which was early modern thinking, so Spinoza, Leibniz, Descartes, that kind of stuff. Now, their writing, the first generation printing, has really got underway. So they're building on an oral tradition. And one of the reasons that I think Leibniz works the way he does, and it's a little bit kind of tricky and can feel bonkers, is that he's kind of halfway, he's suspended. He's the first generation of thinkers who's thinking, actually writing changes how you think. But he's still got the oral tradition because he was brought up in a scholastic school. And actually, philosophy works already. It works in kind of rhythms. You do it differently, but it's got a kind of a rhythm of its own that you can really explore on a stand-up show and actually make matter. What you don't do, ever, is perform the books as they're written. I started off trying to perform the first book of the Republic as it's written, and it works great as written, but never do that, it doesn't work. What you have to do is you have to spin it off and make it into a performance piece. And a performance piece, you've got to pitch the emotions, you've got to kind of explain it slightly differently. I mean, and there are two ways I do this then. The first way is backwards read for the history of freedom. I call it standing up for freedom, as I said, because freedom is worth standing up for. And it's kind of like that traditional history of political thought lecture, you know, you all do in about year 1 or 2 of a philosophy degree. And that's where it started, because I actually started off teaching that course. And that's what really got me excited on philosophy, and the history of philosophy, and how you can make it really kind of important. But it's different, because you're performing it. Most importantly, it goes without saying, you don't formally teach it if you're performing. And you're certainly not trying to give a balanced account. I don't do that. You might have all detected my slight political bias, so never mind, you'll get it by the end. On the contrary, I think it's rather a portrait of a book that could be written. And that's actually one thing I think you can do with stand-up philosophy. You don't have to write a book. You can just kind of write a portrait of a book. You can set the muses spinning. This is what I would use if I was writing this book. And so you can then write a book that can have lots of different endings. So if you arrange a certain set of philosophers and you're performing them as marching ideas, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the ones I actually tend to do, you can present them. So you could write, I am politically quite left-wing, but I will have it so that conservatives will love the show as well, and I deliberately do that, delight in doing that. Because you could have a right-wing spin of all these thinkers, you just take out a different set of strands. Because it's not linear. I'm not presenting an argument, I don't have to. The freedom of performance is the freedom to not have to present an argument, and to make that not having to quite exciting. And actually it is, because it gives people back the ability to think differently with the thinkers, if you do it right. So how do I do it? Well, in standing up for freedom, you have to have a mixture. So I have mental squib pieces. So I summarise Marx in 3 Arguments on the Panic Attack. It's quite good. The Panic Attack is a good one. Or The 4-Minute Foucault, The History of Sexuality, Volume 1. If anybody wants me to do it at lunch and you prod me, I will do it. I am rehearsed up to it. I can do it. And it does take about 4 minutes. Which will take you through an argument. You strip it down. And I'm using an oral trick there. Oral tricks work by you strip down an argument, it's kind of bare essential to say, right, that bit that matters, that bit that matters, that bit that matters, and you just kind of spin it between them and put a joke or two in and then it's done. It's surprisingly easy, actually. Or the other ones I love doing in the Standing Up for Freedom show is those really weird texts, like What is Enlightenment? If you've never heard What is Enlightenment, so that's Kant, yeah? That's the book where he starts off by saying, what is happening now, what is in the air? And everybody thinks he's going to be terribly liberal because he's talking about the Enlightenment, yeah? And then towards the end of it he says, argue as much as you like, but in the end obey, because it is in obeying your freedom truly lasts. And you can have a polite audience. I love doing that between left-wing liberal audiences, because they'll heckle you. And heckling Kant is dangerous and very fun. But you can really challenge people, because they'll assume you're going on one way, and then you just turn it around and you go on the other. And then there are those shows you use, thinking has to be collective, and so I use lots of storytelling techniques. I'm afraid I use audience participation for stories about Kant. And you can get that, and that will kind of help people understand what you're doing and how ideas work. But the advantage of the way I do it, this going backwards read, is you don't have to tie anything together. You can have themes that come back, and you can also use the history itself. One of my favourite pieces is a weird old piece. It's Cicero's Republic. Does anybody remember Cicero's Republic? If you read it, it reads like the American Constitution, division of powers, precedents, and things like that. So if you present it as a constitution, it would seem fairly dry, boring history, until you point out 2 things. It was a fragment written 2,000 years ago, and Cicero lost his life for it. And doing that, again, I do it to audiences who would decide themselves as not very political, and they're not engaged with party politics, and isn't that awful? And actually you can inspire them. Because this is the best rendition, the best defence, I think, of our current system, because it was the model on which it was based on. Distorted, changed as a monster, what we have. But still you can get back to that passion. So it gives you a power, it gives you an ability to play it. Or another one I love doing is Aquinas' argument for just war. If you put the right impersonation on, now I haven't been practicing my Tony Blair, but if you do that, the Tony Blair impersonation as he's the acolyte and Aquinas the master, it gets very edgy, very, very quickly, and very, very funny. And audiences just aren't used to that. They're not used to, you go into a public room, I do it, that one I will do on a rowdy poetry night, and they don't really know what to do because they don't know what's hit them. And what's hit them is a nice idea. With the Standing Up for Freedom show, What actually holds that together, and you always have to have things that hold shows together, is the trial of Socrates. Because the trial of Socrates, that kind of moment where Socrates is on trial, and I get the audience to play the part of the people of Athens. And so you have this lovely debate where Socrates goes through all his arguments about truth. Let me tell you as it is, as it's always seemed to me, truth is virtue. Virtue is goodness. And you can get them, because that's a weird idea, but you can get them to kind of really affiliate with that. So much so that they don't really want to continue to death, which is quite fun actually. You can play games of chess. So, the other show I do is much more conventional. I always call it the ideal breaker's yard, where ideas come and you can salvage them. I would take ideas like Derrida's notion of difference and explain why I use it for maths teaching. I really do. Why do I use it for maths teaching? Derrida is all about writing, and maths is all about writing in a way that's different from English writing. So you can explain that actually as a stand-up show. Or you can take bits of Deleuze. Deleuze is famously difficult, but you can summarise them in 3 or 4 sounds if you really think about it. And you can do that on a stand-up show, because you can be naughty. So I am. And that one I hold together by allowing Marx to reply to us. What would Marx say if he came back? I'm drawing to a close now. So, for me, ideas work as performance pieces. You can't present them as you would present a formal paper. That won't work. You can't put forward a steady argument. But you can't not do philosophy in it. It's got to matter. And ironically, properly presented, the thing that works best is the difficult stuff. Actually, difficult ideas. Because people will respond to them. If you perform them right, with a passion, spinning them this way and that, they will respond quite well. I can actually make the lecture stuff pay. Actually pay. Yeah, I know, it's a bit surprising, isn't it? You have to have the right audience, and I've got a tame audience. I've been doing it for years in Exeter. So I have people who come to my shows, and so it takes a while, but you can do it. And actually, it changes the way you understand philosophy. Understanding philosophy orally, for me, has been very, very liberating. It means that I do write stuff downscale, but it gives you a different dimension, a dimension that's actually worth exploring with, worth playing with. So the next time you have to give a lecture, just try and remember it, and do it off the cuff, distill the argument, and see what you can do.